We all like to think we know the people we share a roof or a workspace with. We form neat little versions of them in our heads, the quiet accountant, the doting mother, the perfect, flawless family man. But human beings are deep, dark oceans, and beneath the surface, everyone is hiding something. Today, we are diving into a gripping compilation of stories where the masks finally slip. These are tales of hidden motives, whispered rumors, and the jaw-dropping moments when the truth refuses to stay buried. In this collection, we'll explore how the deepest betrayals don't just happen at home, they bleed into our professional lives. From carefully calculated corporate takedowns to long overdue reckonings, these are the ultimate stories of workplace revenge fueled by the toxic fallout of family drama. Grab your coffee and get comfortable. Once you start reading, you won't be able to look away. For 4 years, I gave my youth, my sanity, and my absolute loyalty to Apex Logistics. I started as a low-level data entry clerk and worked my way up to senior operations manager. I knew the shipping routes, the vendor contracts, and the inventory quirks better than anyone else alive. But more than that, I knew the CEO, Arthur Vance. Arthur was a looming, charismatic figure in his late 50s who treated the company like his personal fiefdom. To the public, he was a self-made billionaire and a generous philanthropist. To me, he was a mentor. When my mother passed away during my second year at the company, Arthur was the one who pulled me into his office, handed me a glass of scotch, and told me that Apex was my family now. I believed him. I worked 80-hour weeks, skipped holidays, and practically lived in my cubicle, all to prove I was worthy of the trust he placed in me. Then, Julian arrived. Julian was Arthur's 24-year-old son. Fresh out of an Ivy League school with a degree in marketing and an unbearable aura of entitlement, Julian was handed the role of Vice President of Operations. My department. Overnight, I went from reporting directly to Arthur to being Julian's glorified babysitter. I tried to be patient. I tried to teach him the ropes. But Julian wasn't interested in learning, he was interested in ruling. He would stroll into the office at 11 a.m., reeking of expensive cologne, override my logistical schedules, and sign off on disastrous vendor agreements just to show he had the power to do so. When his blunders inevitably caused delays, he blamed me. The breaking point came during the annual Q3 review. Julian had completely botched a major distribution contract with our largest regional partner, costing the company nearly $400,000 in penalties. It was entirely his paper trail that caused the disaster. Yet, during the board meeting, Julian stood up, looked the investors in the eye, and laid the blame squarely on my shoulders, claiming I had fed him faulty data. I looked at Arthur, waiting for my mentor to defend me. I waited for the man who called me a family to stand up for the truth. Instead, Arthur avoided my gaze, cleared his throat, and said, "We appreciate your years of service, David, but accountability is paramount at Apex. We're going to have to let you go." I was escorted out of the building by security 20 minutes later, holding a single cardboard box of my belongings. The humiliation was a physical ache in my chest. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring up at the glass monolith of the Apex building, tears of rage blurring my vision. I hadn't just lost my job, I had lost my sense of reality. That night, numb and desperate for answers, I did something I should have done years ago. I went through the old, dusty boxes of my mother's journals and financial documents stored in my basement. She had worked as a freelance accountant in the early days of her career, long before her illness. I was looking for a distraction, a memory of a time when the world made sense. Instead, I found a monster. Deep inside a faded accordion folder labeled Vance and Associates, 1998, I found a series of ledgers written in my mother's neat, precise handwriting. As I pieced the numbers together, a sickening realization washed over me. Arthur Vance wasn't a self-made man. In the late 90s, his original firm had been on the brink of absolute bankruptcy due to his gross mismanagement and a severe gambling addiction. To save himself, Arthur had embezzled millions from a localized pension fund, the very fund that managed the retirement savings of hundreds of working-class families in our hometown, including my mother's. My mother had discovered the discrepancy. But before she could report it, Arthur had used his legal team to threaten her, framing the paperwork to make it look like she was the one skimming the books. Terrified of going to prison and losing custody of me, a toddler at the time, she signed a non-disclosure agreement, resigned, and watched her career evaporate. The stress of the silent accusation broke her spirit. The financial ruin kept us in poverty for a decade. Arthur hadn't hired me out of the goodness of his heart. He hadn't mentored me because he saw potential. He hired me to keep his enemy close. He wanted to monitor the son of the woman he ruined, ensuring that the ghost of his past would never come back to haunt him. And the moment his own son's incompetence threatened the family legacy, I became the sacrificial lamb all over again. The grief transformed into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They wanted drama? They wanted a family legacy? I was going to give them one. I spent the next 3 weeks constructing a digital fortress of retribution. I still had copies of the proprietary logistical software blueprints I had designed for Apex, systems that Julian had no idea how to operate or maintain. More importantly, I had the 1998 ledgers, alongside public court records of the pension fund's mysterious collapse. I didn't go to the police first. Arthur was wealthy enough to buy his way out of a 28-year-old financial crime due to the statute of limitations. No, I needed to strike where it would hurt the Van Cess the most, their pride, their business, and their relationship with each other. I anonymously reached out to Apex's top 3 rival logistics firms. I offered them a highly specialized, entirely legal consulting service. Using my intimate knowledge of Apex's systemic vulnerabilities and Julian's predictable, arrogant shipping patterns, I helped these rivals underbid Apex on every major upcoming government and corporate contract. Simultaneously, I initiated Phase 2. I knew that Julian, desperate to prove he didn't need me, had taken over the upcoming bidding war for the Global Transit account, a contract worth 45% of Apex's total annual revenue. Julian, in his infinite arrogance, didn't bother to check the historical fuel surcharge algorithms. 2 days before the final bids were due, I sent an anonymous package directly to Julian's personal assistant, marked confidential, for VP Vance's eyes only. Competitive intelligence. Inside was a carefully doctored, highly convincing, insider leak from their main competitor, suggesting the competitor was bidding incredibly high. Julian took the bait hook, line, and sinker. Desperate to secure a massive profit margin and look like a genius to his father, Julian altered Apex's final bid, skyrocketing their prices to an absurd, uncompetitive percentage. On the day the Global Transit contract winners were announced, Apex didn't just lose, they were humiliated. They weren't even in the top 3. The company's stock plummeted by 22% in a single afternoon. But the final blow was yet to come. While the board was convening an emergency meeting to address the stock crash, I sent an email to every single board member, every major shareholder, and every local media outlet. The email contained the digitized copies of my mother's 1998 ledgers, paired with a meticulously detailed narrative explaining exactly how Arthur Vance built his empire on stolen retirement funds, and how he had recently fired the son of his victim to cover up his son's financial disasters. I sat in a coffee shop across the street from the Apex headquarters, watching the chaos unfold in real time on social media and news feeds. Through the glass windows of the executive floor, I could see through my binoculars. The blinds were open. Arthur was standing over Julian, his face purple with rage, screaming so hard I could almost hear it through the double-paned glass. Julian looked small, terrified, and utterly broken. A few hours later, a press release was issued. Arthur Vance was stepping down as CEO effectively immediately due to health reasons, and Julian Vance was removed from the board. The board announced an independent forensic audit of the company's entire history. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur's private number. It simply read, "What do you want?" I typed back a single sentence, the words my mother should have been able to say decades ago. "I just collected the interest on your debt." I blocked the number, closed my laptop, and walked out into the afternoon sun. For the first time in my life, the air felt perfectly clear. If you think Arthur Vance's downfall was explosive, brace yourself, because the corporate world has an even darker side when the betrayal comes from the inside out. It's one thing to fight an external enemy who ruined your family's past. It's an entirely different nightmare when your own blood relative decides to sacrifice your future on the altar of corporate greed. Our next story takes us inside a high-stakes architectural firm, where a brilliant young designer learns that blood isn't always thicker than water, especially when there is a multi-million-dollar partnership on the line. Growing up, my Aunt Clara was my idol. She was a powerhouse architect, a woman who had broken through every glass ceiling in a heavily male-dominated industry to become a senior partner at Vanguard Design Group. When I graduated at the top of my class with a degree in sustainable architecture, Clara was the first to call. She bypassed the standard HR bottleneck and brought me directly into her department as a junior associate. I felt like the luckiest person alive. I wasn't just building a career, I was building a legacy alongside my own family. For 3 years, Clara was my mentor, my advocate, and my boss. Or so I thought. The turning point of my life came with the Horizon project. The city had announced an open competition for a massive, multi-million-dollar waterfront revitalization contract. It was the kind of project that could define an architect's entire career. Clara called me into her office, locked the door, and told me that this was our moment. She admitted that her recent designs hadn't been well received by the board and that she was facing immense pressure to prove she still had the creative edge. "We do this together, Elena," she told me, grasping my hands tightly. "You bring the raw, modern, eco-friendly concepts, and I'll handle the corporate politics to get it approved. When we win, I'll name you as the co-lead architect. You'll get the promotion, the credit, and your name on the masthead." I poured my absolute soul into the Horizon project. For 6 months, I practically lived on black coffee and 3 hours of sleep a night. I designed a breathtaking, self-sustaining pavilion system that utilized tidal energy and reclaimed materials, blending seamlessly with the city's historic coastline. It was innovative, it was bold, and it was undeniably my best work. Every line, every structural calculation, every aesthetic detail came from my brain. Clara watched over my shoulder, offering vague encouragements but mostly letting me drive the entire creative process. The night before the final presentation to the City Council and Vanguard's executive board, I uploaded the massive design files to our shared secure server. Clara told me to go home and get some sleep. "I'll handle the final rendering exports, Elena. You've done the heavy lifting. Rest up, tomorrow is your big day." The next morning, I walked into the grand auditorium at City Hall, my heart pounding with nervous excitement. I took my seat in the second row, waiting for Clara to take the stage. When she did, she looked magnificent, confident, commanding, and radiating authority. The projector flared to life, and my beautiful, intricate designs filled the massive screen. But as Clara began to speak, the blood drained from my face. "I am proud to introduce the Horizon concept," Clara announced to the crowd, her voice echoing through the microphone. "A vision I have spent the last year conceptualizing and designing independently. I wanted to push the boundaries of what Vanguard Design Group can achieve. Independently." The word hit me like a physical blow. I sat frozen as she spent the next 45 minutes presenting my work, using my exact phrasing, my design philosophies, and my engineering breakthroughs. She never looked at me. Not once. And when the presentation ended to a standing ovation, Vanguard's CEO stood up, shook her hand, and announced that Clara was officially being promoted to managing partner. When the crowd finally dispersed, I cornered Clara in the hallway behind the auditorium. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. "Clara, what was that?" I whispered, trying to contain my rage. "You said we were co-leads. You said my name would be on the pitch." Clara's warm, ant-like demeanor instantly vanished. Her eyes turned to ice. "Let's be realistic, Elena," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, quiet hiss. You're a junior associate. The city council doesn't care about a nobody. They bought the project because my name was attached to it. Be grateful you got to work on it at all. I designed every single square inch of it. I choked out. And you did a lovely job for my department, she replied coldly. But if you ever mention this to the board, or if you try to claim copyright, I will ensure you are fired for insubordination. I'll make sure no firm in this country ever hires you again. Family or not, Elena, do not test me. I went home that night completely shattered. The betrayal was double-edged. She hadn't just stolen my career-defining work, she had weaponized our family bond to manipulate me into a state of compliant silence. Over the next week, I discovered just how deep her treachery went. I logged into our internal HR system and found that Clara had already filed a formal review claiming I was struggling to meet performance metrics, and required heavy oversight, a preemptive strike to discredit me in case I blew the whistle. But Clara made one fatal mistake. She was a brilliant politician, but she was a terrible technician. Because she had rushed to export the final rendering files the night before the presentation to ensure my name wasn't on the title blocks, she hadn't bothered to look deeply into the underlying digital infrastructure of the design files. I had built the entire Horizon project using an advanced, cloud-based building information modeling (BAM) software. Every single line drawn, every wall placed, and every material specified carried a digital fingerprint. The software automatically logs the exact user ID, timestamp, and IP address of every single edit. More importantly, I had incorporated a highly specific, proprietary algorithm I had developed during my master's thesis to calculate structural stress loads under tidal pressure. I didn't argue with Clara. I didn't file a complaint with Vanguard's compromised HR department. Instead, I quietly resigned, citing personal reasons, and took a job at a mid-sized, fiercely competitive rival firm called Meridian Architecture. I waited patiently for 3 months. I knew how the timeline of the Horizon project worked. Before the city council could cut the check and break ground, the design had to pass a rigorous, independent technical audit by the city's engineering board to verify structural viability. Clara, having stolen the design without understanding the underlying math, had no idea how to defend the structural calculations under intense scrutiny. She was scheduled to present the granular technical breakdown to the city's chief engineer on a Tuesday afternoon. The Monday night before her presentation, I triggered my trap. I compiled a massive, unassailable digital dossier. It contained the complete, unedited BAM metadata history, showing that 99.4% of the project had been generated by my user account over a 6-month period, while Clara's account had only logged in for 12 minutes to change the author names on the title blocks. I also included the original, timestamped source code for my stress load algorithm, which I had legally copyrighted under my own name a year prior. I sent this dossier directly to the City Integrity Commission, the Chief Engineering Auditor, and Vanguard's primary liability insurance providers. I didn't send it to the media. I wanted the legal and financial machinery to crush her silently from the top down. On Tuesday afternoon, Clara walked into the City Council chamber, expecting another easy victory. Instead, she was met by a panel of stone-faced auditors and Vanguard's terrified legal counsel. The chief engineer pulled up my dossier on the main screen. He asked Clara to explain the core mathematics behind the tidal stress algorithm. She couldn't. She stumbled, she panicked, and she tried to claim it was proprietary information. The engineer then revealed that the algorithm was indeed proprietary, but it belonged to Elena Vance, who had not authorized Vanguard or Clara to use it for a commercial bid. The fallout was catastrophic. The city immediately disqualified Vanguard Design Group from the Horizon project due to intellectual property theft and fraudulent misrepresentation. The multi-million-dollar contract evaporated in an instant. Vanguard's stock dipped, but the reputational damage was fatal. Facing a massive malpractice lawsuit from their own investors, Vanguard's executive board acted swiftly. Clara wasn't just stripped of her managing partnership, she was summarily fired for gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. The state licensing board opened an investigation into her architectural credentials for plagiarism, effectively ending her career forever. 2 weeks later, Meridian Architecture, my new employer, was awarded the Horizon project contract by default as the runner-up bidder. The city requested one condition, that the original designer oversee the project. My first day on the waterfront site as the officially designated lead architect, my phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice was unrecognizable, shaky, defeated, and stripped of all its former arrogance. "Elena, please," she whispered. "Vanguard is suing me for damages. My career is gone. The family, your mother, your uncles, everyone is turning their backs on me. How could you do this to your own aunt?" I looked out over the glittering water, watching the construction cranes begin to move, realizing my designs were finally going to become reality. "I didn't do anything to my aunt, Clara," I said calmly. "I just allowed the city to see who the real architect was." I hung up, walked over to the foreman, and began to build my future. It is terrifying how easily people can use the guise of family to manipulate, steal, and deceive. But while our first 2 stories dealt with stolen labor and long-buried history, our final tale dials the stakes up to an entirely different level. What happens when the family drama isn't about an aunt or a former mentor, but a toxic marriage that infects a multi-million-dollar tech startup? When a husband decides to treat his wife as an expendable asset to be traded away for investor funding, he learns the hard way that a brilliant mind pushed to its absolute limit is the most dangerous adversary in the world. I spent 7 years building Novatech from a chaotic garage operation into a thriving, multi-million-dollar data analytics firm. I wasn't just the co-founder, I was the sole architect of our core product, a predictive AI algorithm named Ether that could forecast consumer behavior shifts with an unprecedented 94% accuracy rate. I wrote every single line of code. But if you looked at our corporate website, public relations features, or tech magazine covers, you wouldn't see my face. You would see Mark's. Mark was my husband and the CEO of Novatech. He was charismatic, tall, and possessed a silver tongue that could charm venture capitalists out of their last dollar. Early on, we made a mutual agreement. I would stay in the background as the chief technology officer, quietly engineering the product, while he acted as the public-facing visionary. It felt like a perfect partnership. I trusted him implicitly. He was my husband, my partner in life, and the man I loved. But success changes people, and absolute corporate adoration changes them completely. Over our 6th year, Mark began to slip away. The late-night coding sessions we used to share were replaced by high society galas and investor dinners that I wasn't invited to. He started talking down to me in front of our junior engineers, dismissively calling me the tech support rather than the co-founder. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of preparing for our upcoming Series B funding round, a massive $50 million deal that would secure Novatech's global dominance. Then came the night of the Vanguard Gala. I had stayed late at the office to patch a critical bug in the Ether engine. Exhausted, I decided to pack up and drive to the event to surprise Mark. When I arrived at the luxury hotel venue, I slipped into the grand ballroom undetected. I scanned the crowd and finally spotted Mark in a VIP booth, surrounded by 3 of our primary institutional investors. I smiled and walked toward them, but stopped dead in my tracks when I overheard Mark speaking into a hot microphone near an investor's ear. "Oh, Elena." Mark chuckled, swirling his glass of champagne. "She's a brilliant worker bee, sure. But let's be honest, gentlemen, she's hit her ceiling. She's too emotional, too rigid. Once the Series B funding closes next month, the board is going to quietly push her out and replace her with a real Silicon Valley heavy hitter. Don't worry, I've already structured the new equity agreements. She'll be stripped of her voting rights, and she'll walk away with a minor severance. Novatech is my company." The investors laughed and clinked their glasses. I stood there, frozen in the shadows, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me. The betrayal was dizzying. He wasn't just planning to divorce me, he was planning to professionally assassinate me, stealing the algorithm that was my life's work while rewriting history to make it look like I was just an incompetent employee he had outgrown. I didn't confront him. I didn't cause a scene. I quietly turned around, walked out into the cold night air, and drove back to the office. The sadness lasted for exactly 30 minutes on the drive home. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it had hardened into pure, calculated malice. If Mark wanted to find out what Novatech looked like without me, I was more than happy to show him. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the part of the dutiful, unsuspecting wife and CTO. I smiled at breakfast, signed the preliminary Series B documents he put in front of me, and continued optimizing the Ether software. But underneath my compliant exterior, I was executing a masterclass in digital corporate warfare. Mark had forgotten one fundamental truth: he might own the title of CEO, but I owned the server infrastructure. Every piece of Novatech's data routed through protocols that I had personally designed. First, I conducted a deep forensic dive into Mark's corporate emails and personal financial records using my admin access. What I found was a treasure trove of absolute corruption. To make Novatech look infinitely more attractive to the Series B investors, Mark had been artificially inflating our active user metrics for the past 2 quarters. He had created thousands of ghost accounts and fabricated data traffic reports through a shell marketing company he secretly owned. It was textbook securities fraud. Second, I prepared the Ether algorithm for my departure. I didn't delete the code, that would be an amateur move, easily traceable and highly illegal. Instead, I implemented what programmers call a logic bomb, but with a highly specific, psychological twist. I embedded a deeply hidden encryption key within the core predictive model. This key was tied to a live, external cloud server under my personal control. Without this key constantly validating the data streams, Ether wouldn't crash. It would do something much worse: it would subtly, imperceptibly begin to decay. Its predictive accuracy would slowly drop from 94% to 40% over the span of a single week, rendering its forecasts entirely useless and actively destructive to anyone relying on them. The trap was set for the day of the final Series B signing ceremony. The investors, legal teams, and tech journalists were all gathered in our main glass conference room. Mark was at the head of the table, beaming with narcissistic pride, basking in the glow of his impending $50 million triumph. Right as he picked up the pen to sign the final contract, I stood up from my seat at the end of the table. "Before you sign that, gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room, "I think you should look at your tablets." I pressed a single button on my laptop. Simultaneously, every investor and board member received an encrypted file. It contained the complete, unassailable proof of Mark's falsified user metrics, the financial paper trail linking Novatech to his fraudulent shell company, and a comprehensive breakdown of the fabricated traffic reports. The room erupted into absolute chaos. The lead investor slammed his tablet down, his face turning pale with fury. "What is the meaning of this, Mark?" he roared. Mark panicked, his polished exterior completely shattering. He stared at the documents on his screen, then looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pure hatred. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled employee. Security, remove her." "I'm not a disgruntled employee, Mark," I said calmly, packing my laptop into my bag. "I am the majority intellectual property holder of this company. And as of 30 seconds ago, I have officially revoked Novatech's access to the licensing rights of the Ether algorithm." I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a den of wolves tearing each other apart. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. The Series B funding round collapsed before the ink could even dry. Within 48 hours, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal criminal investigation into Mark for corporate fraud. The board of directors, desperate to save their own skins, unanimously fired Mark from his position as CEO and stripped him of his shares to pay for the impending legal defense fees. A week later, Novatech filed for bankruptcy. Its stock was worthless, its reputation completely destroyed. I, however, moved to a quiet cabin upstate. Because I had legally protected the core patents of the Ether algorithm under my own name before Novatech was ever formed, the technology remained entirely mine. Yesterday evening, my lawyer informed me that Mark's legal team had reached out, begging for a settlement. He is facing potential prison time and absolute financial ruin. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Mark, calling from a burner phone. "Elena, please," he sobbed, all of his former charisma completely gone. "You've ruined me. I have nothing left. The company is gone, my reputation is dead, and I'm facing jail time. We were a family. How could you do this to your husband?" I looked at the glowing screen of my laptop, where the Ether engine was running flawlessly on my personal server, perfectly predicting a massive market shift that would make my next venture incredibly wealthy. "We weren't a family, Mark," I replied coldly. "You were a salesman. And you forgot that you never actually owned the product." I hung up, deleted the number, and began coding my own future. What an incredible journey through the dark underbelly of professional ambition and deep-seated family drama. If there is one lesson to take away from these 3 stories, it's this: never mistake someone's quiet dedication for weakness, and never think that a family bond gives you a free pass to exploit someone's hard work. In the corporate world, the masks we wear can only hide our true motives for so long, and when the reckoning comes, the revenge is always served with cold, calculated precision. But now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 3 stories was your absolute favorite? Have you ever witnessed a jaw-dropping moment of workplace revenge, or have you ever had to deal with a toxic family dynamic bleeding into your career? Let me know your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you loved this compilation and want more deep dive, high-stakes dramatic narratives, make sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next collection. Until next time, keep your secrets close, and watch your back.